Welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. If you struggle with food and weight like I did, welcome home. Welcome everybody to the Heal Your Hunger Show. So happy to have you here. It is a great day to be alive, and I am recording live from the Secret Sauce group. So thank you folks in the Secret Sauce group who are watching and checking in and leaving comments. And if you're not in the Secret Sauce group yet, you got to join us there. So go to Facebook, type in Secret Sauce to End Emotional Eating, and request to join, and we'll let you in. And we'd love to have you. That's where I do my live recordings and for my podcast, interviews with guests, special announcements, really cool stuff going on there. But most importantly is community with other emotional eaters, because that's so important for us. You know, being around people who get what it's like to be powerless over a cookie, to be out of control of food, to feel crazy cravings that make you do crazy things, you know, to live in that terrible, terrible angst of, you know, having binged and feeling sick about it. You know, that stuff is, it's a unique experience to be sure, right? And so that's something that we share. And so that's what we got to have our community. We got to have a community with other emotional eaters in order to heal. So please join us there. And I want to talk to you today about a really important topic. And one I think is very apropos for this time of year. You know, Valentine's Day is coming up. And yeah, it's important to talk about intimacy. And so, you know, I have some experience with intimacy and not intimacy, you know, having been in a really long-term relationship that I no longer am, having just recently ventured into a new relationship with somebody, which I take one day at a time. I'm not going to lie. I do not like thinking about long-term anything when it comes to relationships because of my experience of being in one for so long. I kind of feel like I have, you know, on dating sites, they call it LTR for long-term relationships. So I tell people I have PTSD from LTR. So, you know, it was a long, my entire adult life relationship. So, so I like taking things just one day at a time, which I think is super, super helpful and healthy. Not that I'm looking to bolt, you know, by the grace of God, I'm not, because intimacy doesn't scare me anymore. But it's, you know, it's a healthy way to approach life in general, especially with food, right? Taking it one day at a time, making these, you know, weight loss goals for the summer, or to fit in our bikini by June, or, you know, to get thin enough for our reunion. All that craziness backfires. It usually backfires on us. So this is an opportunity to just, you know, eat healthy meals one day at a time, make our lives be about just today. So healthy. And frankly, that was in the Bible. You know, the one day at a time concept comes from Jesus in the Bible. You know, I'm not going to quote the Bible. I'm going to mess it up. But he's in there saying, you know, live this day. You know, let's live this day, and why worry about tomorrow? So let's dig into this topic. Do you sabotage intimacy? Do you sabotage intimacy? Ask yourself right now. You know, do you sabotage intimacy? And I'm going to give you a checklist, okay? A 7-point checklist of things you might be doing that are indeed sabotaging to intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't just mean sexual intimacy. I mean just closeness, a feeling of connection and closeness with those around you. You know, intimacy can happen between friends, you know, just in emotional intimacy and honesty and trust. You know, that's super important. And then of course with our spouse or our love, you know, our lover, our mate, you know, our significant other, whatever you want to call it. Certainly that's closeness, emotional closeness, and sexual closeness as well. You know, and I've done it all. I've sabotaged all intimacy, you know, every form. And I'll just kind of preface this whole topic by saying a little bit about my experience, which is, you know, at an early age, I was sexually abused, and that, of course, will put, you know, help me put walls up. You know, anybody who's had that experience, any kind of abuse, frankly, you know, it causes us to put up walls where we don't want to trust anyone, and we actually make a decision at a very early age. I'm not trusting anyone. Screw it. You know, it's not safe to trust. And that's a decision that many emotional eaters make at a very young age. And, you know, it saves us in the moment. It makes us feel safer. It keeps us from going too deep with anybody and getting hurt again, because chances are if we got hurt once, and we haven't overcome that or healed that, we will seek, on a subconscious level, we'll seek that out again. That same experience will keep repeating. And if you have experiences in your life that reflect, experiences from your childhood, that's because you haven't healed the root cause. That wound is not healed. And when it hasn't healed, we repeat it. We're doomed to repeat it. No matter how much we know consciously, people often say when they grow up with an alcoholic parent, they say, I'm never going to drink. That was actually me. My parents were not alcoholic, but were heavy drinkers. And my dad might have been an alcoholic, but was never terrible. But fact is, it was enough of a dependence on alcohol that I made a declaration that I would never drink. And whatever we resist forces us, okay? And whatever we force resists us. Well, I resisted the idea of, being dependent on alcohol, and I declared I would never do that. And guess what I did? I became alcoholic. I drank very alcoholically in my high school and college years, and to the point where I needed to stop drinking, just to be safe. And my experience is when we are saying we're not going to be like our parents, we end up like our parents. So certainly, when I was young and I said I wasn't going to open up to anybody, I wasn't going to trust anyone, because nobody's trustworthy, I ended up trusting people all the time, like the wrong people. And if you've had that experience, you know what I'm talking about. It's like you're so intent on never trusting, and that wound or that deep belief that we can't trust somehow attracts more untrustworthy people to us. So the best thing we can do is learn to heal that wound, so we're not just fighting it and fighting fire with fire, saying I'll never trust anyone. We're healing that wound so we can attract trustworthy people and where it's safe to trust. So the intimacy thing, for me, came about on account of those decisions I made at a young age to not trust. And what happened was throughout my life is that my relationships lacked intimacy. I was not capable of intimacy. I was not capable of really going deep with people. In fact, I had especially a fear of sexual intimacy. Okay, so because of the sexual abuse I'd had and my lack of healing over that situation, when I would get physically close to somebody, I would break it off like almost immediately. Okay, it was a crazy pattern that I had where once I was sexually intimate with somebody, I bolted. I absolutely bolted. So there's a fear of intimacy for you. So that's not that way today, by the grace of God. And I think the reason why this topic came up is because I have an opportunity for doing things differently. Certainly with my husband, it was a journey of coming to be trusting. He was certainly, somebody who was very caring. He cared about me and protected me, and trusting him worked, for me. But that was a journey to come to that place. And so it was a rocky one, and it wasn't a great ride for either of us. And so along those lines, and I have an opportunity now, thankfully, to start things out on a new foot. And I don't fear intimacy anymore because of the healing that I've done. So I'm excited for just being open and vulnerable and close and not having walls up. That's been my experience so far, and it's been really, really wonderful because I'm free. I'm free from, being fettered by those fears. So I want to talk to you, though. I want to talk to you about this fear of intimacy and how you might be sabotaging intimacy and not knowing it. The problem is that these things show up in very surreptitious ways, and they're sneaky, they're disguised. We don't realize we're doing it. So here's my checklist. The first sign that you might be sabotaging intimacy, and I did this all the time, is through fighting and arguing. I was incredibly argumentative. My husband would call me on it a lot, when I'd be picking a fight and loving to argue, loving to disagree. And, it's so funny because I even noticed this between my mom and her husband now. They do argue somewhat, not a ton, but when they are arguing, I always wonder about that quality, because it does obviously put, it puts an obstacle between two people when there's arguing and fighting. I know that's obvious, but I just mean, being argumentative, even on a more subtle level, can be a sign that you're trying to escape intimacy. And I've done it so many times. My husband would call me on it. And I'm grateful for that because I got to see the pattern. So are you argumentative? Do you disagree with your loved one, your significant other? Do you tend to think they're wrong and you're right? Do you have that sense? I think all women tend to have that sense that we know better, right? And so, are you doing that? Are you pulling that and with your significant other? And if you are, take a look at it. Like, why do you need to disagree? My husband used to say, he's my ex now. I refer to him as, I'm not used to that. I don't like the word ex, frankly. So I don't know what to say about that. My former husband, he used to say, we're on the same team. Like, why are you fighting? We're on the same team. And so just ask yourself, do I see myself as adversarial with my spouse? Am I positioning us against each other? In subtle ways. These aren't big deals. As an emotional eater, we're very agreeable and people pleasing, but in subtle ways, even if it's in your mind where you're thinking that's not true, or that's a stupid statement, or I know better, or, if you'd only do it my way, those are all ways of creating distance and sabotaging intimacy. Okay, so the next clue that you might be sabotaging intimacy is by being critical and controlling. And I know you don't relate to that. Come on, all emotional eaters are critical and controlling, okay? It's part of the anatomy of the emotional eater. I know I was really the worst offender of this. I used to be so critical. So again, thinking, his idea is stupid, my idea is better, or he doesn't know, or he lacks knowledge, or, just these arrogant, critical thoughts of me knowing more than him, or him not doing it right, and certainly not doing it my way. So are you doing this? Are you being critical and controlling? Do you want things your way? Do you press to have things your way? If so, this is a barrier to intimacy. Putting you first, being focused on your way and the way you want it to be, and getting him to do things your way. I promise you, these are all going to get in the way of your having a sense of closeness. There's a saying out there, would you rather be happy or would you rather be right? And unfortunately for some of us, we're like, let me think hard on that one. I might rather be right. And I get that. Our egos always want to be right. But think about it. Are you doing this controlling thing where you want it your way when you want to be right? And is that causing problems? And of course it will. Being critical, nobody wants to be criticized. Nobody wants to be treated like a little boy. I mean, my former husband used to say, he's got such a great sense of humor, he used to say, I don't know how I ever got by in the first 40 years of my life without you. I don't know how I ever got by, without knowing your way of doing things. And he just always put it back in my face. I was really, you know better than I do. I've been alive longer than you. So definite barrier to intimacy. The third barrier is taking someone for granted. And oh my gosh, I think we're all guilty of this, right? Just sort of taking somebody for granted. But it's that time of year where you can start taking inventory and taking a look. And if you're not in a romantic relationship, do you take your parents for granted? Do you take your kids for granted? The point is, when we take people for granted, when we don't express our appreciation of how much they mean to us, we end up sabotaging intimacy because nobody wants to be taken for granted, and we get in that groove where we do. Everybody does it. But take a look. Are you taking your loved one for granted? Are you not expressing appreciation, and gratitude? It might be time to start doing that, just to rekindle the intimacy. It makes a world of difference when you can just stop and say to somebody, I really appreciate you. Or if somebody, if your spouse does something sweet, like takes your bags in, or offers to go get you something at the store, or just simply put gas in your car, simple gestures, stop, touch that person's hand or give them a hug and say, that was so sweet of you. Thank you. The more gratitude we express, the better the intimacy we will have. Okay. Okay, the fourth obstacle to intimacy is isolation and being emotionally distant. Okay, this is really easy for us to do. And again, everybody does it, but emotional eaters take the cake on this, pardon the pun. We really do. You know, being isolationist is second hat to us because we don't want to deal with people. We don't want to deal with the emotions that dealing with people brings up. And so if you find yourself, you know, having intimacy issues, ask yourself, am I isolating? Am I closing off communication from this person because I just don't want to deal? You know, and so that's an important thing to look for. And the way to come out of that is to push through that fear of intimacy, that fear of connection. Again, it doesn't have to be just with a partner, it can be with anybody. You know, are you isolating? Are you not getting together with girlfriends? Are you putting off letting yourself be seen and known? And oftentimes when we're in the food and when we're binging, the last thing we want to do is be around other people, and especially our friends who are going to notice our weight gain. You know, but you gotta resist that temptation to go in a hole and bury yourself, you know, because it just gets worse and it's only gonna feed on itself and make the eating worse. You know, nip in the bud, reach out, ask for help, and connect, and don't isolate. But that's a huge barrier to intimacy, is to isolate and to not let somebody know what you're thinking, to not, you know, let the cat out of the bag, the squirrel out of the cage, and just let somebody know the pain that you have. A problem shared is a problem cut in half, okay? So if you're isolating, it's time to just take that baby step and talk to somebody about what you're really feeling. Now the next barrier, the fifth barrier to intimacy, is overeating. Of course, right? Huge barrier to intimacy. When we're obsessed with food, when we're eating, we are completely distracted. There is no room for anybody in our lives. Like we could care less about anybody, including our kids, right? They're just a big distraction from us getting the next donut or the next pastry, or going to a movie and eating popcorn by ourselves. You know, overeating just kills intimacy because we're so distracted, we're so busy being in the food, but then the aftermath of it, the self-recrimination, the hating ourselves, the feeling gross, not wanting to be touched. You know, these are all ways that we sabotage intimacy, and it all comes from that terrible habit of overeating and binging. There's nothing worse, right? The last thing we want to do when we binge is be held by someone, to be touched or fondled by someone we love. We just like, don't touch me. I mean, when I've binged, I haven't even wanted to take a shower because I didn't want to touch me. And so it's really, really important to realize that, I mean, probably the biggest obstacle to intimacy is to basically be eating and feeling gross about our bodies. It's so, so destructive. So if that's something you're going through right now, you got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. And start getting help for overeating. Okay, the sixth barrier to intimacy is, this has to do with not being present and conscious, and that is being distracted by technology. Okay, when we're distracted by technology, we are not in any way present, and our kids feel it, our spouse feels it. I mean, and we feel it. We know what it's like when somebody we love is distracted by a text, you know, or scrolling Facebook. It feels crappy, right? When we're trying to tell somebody we love, a story, something that's important to us, and he's there checking at his phone, you know, looking at an app. It's awful. It's an awful feeling, and I'm just as guilty as the next person. So I've done it to other people, but it is a tactic, a sabotaging tactic, okay, to intimacy. When we don't want to connect, when we don't want to deal, we get busy on our phones. And that technology and Facebook and computers and iPads and the things that distract us, even if it's legitimate, like you have work to do, okay? But I have turned that legitimate excuse into an avoidance tactic, okay? An avoidance to avoid intimacy. So check with yourself. Are you getting distracted by the phone? Are you on your phone? Are you by your phone more than you actually need to be? Check that out. You know, put the phone aside, plug it in, and spend the evening with your spouse. Just focus on your spouse. Technology is so distracting. It's such an attention suck. And we cannot be present with other people when we're checking our phones every 5 minutes. And again, you know, I got to listen to my own words here because I've been guilty of this as well. And the seventh hidden clue that we are sabotaging intimacy is packing your schedule with more than you can do without being harried and distracted and stressed. Okay, stress is a big distraction in sabotaging tactic to avoid intimacy. Because when we're busy, we don't have time for other people. We're not present. We're not paying attention to the people we love. We don't see them. We don't hear them. They don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. And it's one of our favorite things to do, right? Is to be busy, 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 because then we don't have to deal with ourselves or deal with intimacy. Emotional eaters are terrified of intimacy. Just like emotional eaters are terrified of writing, we don't want to see what's going to come up in those spaces, in that downtime, in that intimacy time. We're afraid of our feelings. That's all we're talking about here. All these distraction tactics, these are all to avoid feeling. Sure, it's to avoid intimacy, but what is intimacy? Intimacy is a sense of connection. Intimacy is a sense of arousal. Intimacy is a sense of being one with. These are things that are scary for us when we have baggage, when we're convinced that to be intimate is to die. To be intimate is to be hurt. To be intimate is to have, you know, our sense of selves robbed from us. Okay? Every emotional eater has baggage, and that's the stuff that needs to be addressed. That's the stuff that my clients are addressing in my programs. Okay? They're getting to the bottom of that stuff, and they're clearing it out so they can finally allow themselves to be loved, so they can finally be present with people they love, so they can finally give to the people they love. Guys, when we are busy, 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 distracted on our phones, you know, critical, controlling, or isolating, you know, when we're fighting and arguing, these are all things we do so we don't have to feel uncomfortable feelings. The feelings of being critical and angry and what comes up from that can sometimes be more comfortable for us, if it's what we're used to, than true honesty and authenticity and closeness. So these are clues, okay? I'm going to read them back to you. Fighting and arguments, being critical and controlling, taking someone for granted, isolating and being emotionally distant, overeating and feeling disgusting and not wanting to be touched or seen, being on your phone or other electronics that suck your attention and time, and packing your schedule with busyness, you know, not making your relationships priority because you're too busy to do so. That's a choice. Nobody's ever too busy for a relationship. It takes time. It takes intention to spend time together, to make dates to be together, to make dates where the kids aren't around. These are all things that require attention, and they require intention. So if you're not making that a priority, it's probably because of this fear of intimacy. And you might say, no, that's ridiculous. I'm just busy. I'm inviting you to take a closer look. Okay, take a closer look and see what's really going on, and what you can do to change it, because these are all things that can be changed. Okay, you can take a pause when you want to fight and argue. You can look at yourself when you're feeling critical of someone else. Remember, when we have one finger pointing at them, we have three pointing back at us. Do some writing. What's actually going on? Why are you nitpicking somebody else? Why are you taking issue with how somebody's dressed? You know, what is it about yourself that you're not happy about right now? Let's deal with that. That's the only person we can change anyway. You know, starting to express gratitude for those we love. You know, stop taking people for granted. Start connecting with people even though we're uncomfortable. Push through that uncomfortableness. You know, get help for overeating and emotional eating. You know, stop farting around. Get help. Reach out for help. I'm here for you if you want to do that. Being on the phone and texting, you know, start putting your phone down. Make a concerted effort not to be on your phone 24/7, not to have it with you. Put it in another room so you're not tempted. And start leaving space in your schedule for ones that you love. Date nights, you know, getting together, having time without distraction, going for a walk, you know, put some intention behind being with the ones you love. So these are 7 hidden clues and things you can do about them. But look, we all do it. We're all guilty of this, distracting ourselves from being in the present moment, whatever that moment is. But remember, if you're distracting yourself from being with the people you love, it's hurting them, okay? They feel it. They feel undervalued. They feel underappreciated. They feel unloved, and are those things we don't want to feel ourselves? So we got to take the first step and start changing the way we behave. And guess what? When we do that, we're going to feel better about ourselves. We're not going to have that looming sense of guilt because we know that we're checking out and we know it's hurting people. And that's going to lighten our load and make it easier to not overeat. So I hope this is helpful. I think we all need reminders. It's not rocket science, but it's really important to be reminded. And I need the reminders just as much as anybody else. So thank you for indulging me. And it's so wonderful to be with you. And join us in the Secret Sauce group. We've got something really exciting coming up actually this week regarding relationships, and especially relationships with food. So join me there and take good care. I'll see you in the next show. Take care.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to get free support, insider health info, exclusive invites to events, and more, visit healyourhunger.com.